Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, where a furry doggo reads D&D horror stories. In today's episode, we have two examples of games that go bad, though not due to anyone in particular, but instead due to a lack of communication and misunderstandings. Though, before we get into those, this is a graph that shows that a lot of you watching aren't yet subscribed, which is cool if you just want to enjoy the videos when they pop up in your suggested feed. Though, why not click that subscribe button and the bell so you can be notified whenever I upload a new video, as I do occasionally post more than Dungeons & Dragons horror stories, like homebrew reviews and comedy skits. And for those of you that are already subscribed, I see ya and I appreciate ya. Though, with all that standard YouTube crap out of the way, let's hop right into the stories. How one mistake turned a fun session into a nightmarish slog. By Reddit user Luigi580. Normally, whenever I'm on this sub, there is one jerk that takes the fun away from everyone, or does something that makes what was originally a good time into a very bad one. Well, in this story, that jerk was me, a DM that made a very moronic decision. TLDR at the bottom. Now, to preface, despite what I was thinking shortly after this dreaded session, I wouldn't call myself a bad DM. While I have certainly made many minor mistakes, there are plenty of moments within my campaign that my players loved. Heck, I somehow managed to make a DMPC that is considered beloved amongst my players. No, most of my biggest mistakes are things I say in the heat of combat, and this was my worst offense. For context, the player characters: the Cleric Rogue, played by my girlfriend, who I will call Cleric for simplicity, an incredibly good player in general with a fun build, a great backstory, and very good roleplay, but has dice that I genuinely feel reads the room, and if the morale is low, they roll terribly. The Warlock, played by a close friend of mine. She tends to be a more passive player, but has some great moments, especially with comedic timing. Although recently, I felt like she was getting the weakest focus of the group, so I had an idea to have her more heavily involved. The Fighter, played by a friend of Cleric's who I also became friends with, and also the one who got hurt the most in this story. We're going through major points of the plot that heavily involve her character, and we even have a war buddy that is now a revenant tagging along for the arc. I'll go more into what they're doing later. And lastly, the Ranger, who is Fighter's boyfriend. Very chill and easygoing, and while I know him the least of the group, is a guy I can easily recommend as a friend for anyone. I invited him for that very session, so I had to tie him into the story somehow. And now for the setting and in-game situation. We're in an urban fantasy where cars, cell phones, TVs, etc. all exist alongside magic, dragons, the Feywild, etc. But the evil orc god is awakening, and it's up to the main characters to stop the evil and the villains trying to awaken it. The characters live in a country that just lost against another country fighting for independence, and all of them were at least somewhat affected by the war. The Fighter was actually a soldier in the war, and was a hostage survivor that only made it out because the sacrifice made by one of her comrades. This all comes to a head when the killer of said comrade is also trying to awaken Grumsh, the evil orc god, and his subordinates. And in a surprise to Fighter, a captain found her old friend, sort of back from the dead as a revenant. The revenant does not know much about her new state, except that she needs to find her crew and ask questions. While this is primarily a side quest, the arc villain is licking his wounds from an earlier fight, so he's out of commission for a bit. The party find it important to help Fighter's friend. Over time, I give hints that the old commander of their group has gone insane after retirement, and interacting with them could put the Warlock in serious danger. Because of this, they go into the woods that they seem to be living in very cautiously, finding a peaceful town in there, but said town was suffering from many disappearances, one of which was the Ranger, who turned out to be captured by the commander. But his Drake managed to escape and look for help, finding the party. They find the hut that the commander was staying in. Fighter confronted the commander directly. Unbeknownst to the party, the commander was wearing glasses of charming, making it easier for her to capture large characters, like Fighter. Fighter failed her save, and suddenly Cleric, Warlock, Revenant, and Drake had to fight their damage dealer, a crazy half-orc that was staring down Warlock with murderous intent, and a young Remmerhaz that the commander was raising since their isolation. So you can kind of see where this fight is going, or at least its intended path. Cleric and Warlock have to either break the concentration on the commander, or kill them before any more damage happens, while the Ranger has to try and free himself with his Drake. The biggest problem was that I made it very hard to break their concentration. They're a fighter-paladin build, so their concentration was very hard to break, requiring 24 points of damage in a single strike. Cleric was capable of that damage, but the Revenant had 5 levels in Rogue, so with sneak attack and the Revenant's vengeance damage, that should have been easy to do, right? Well, like an idiot, I forget to include the Revenant damage. Oof, that must have been what screwed them over, right? Nope, that certainly didn't help, but it wouldn't have mattered too much compared to the mistake. Because Cleric was smart and prepared for this sort of problem, she bravely got in front of the fighter and cast the spell magic. That was a brilliant use of the spell, and with a magic effect from an item that basically uses Charm Person, a first level spell, you would think that I would reward my party's utility and simply have the charm end, right? Then I said, quote, "I feel like this charm effect is at 5th level, so go ahead and roll for that." Yeah, I really said that. 5th level? I don't think I will ever make a call that stupid ever again. How on earth would that be 5th level? Only Fighter was affected, and it was technically made weaker since I made it concentration based. There was genuinely no way I should have in my right mind ruled like that. But no one was familiar enough with the Charm Person spell to explain how silly the notion was. So it went, and Cleric didn't make the check. Everything went extremely downhill from there. Fighter was dealing serious damage to Warlock, and the Revenant took on the commander, only to perish to a crit Divine Smite. While Warlock and Ranger were trying to make the best of it, Cleric was panicking since none of her spells were working. Seriously, she couldn't roll a single d20 above 8 that night. And Fighter. Poor Fighter. I basically hijacked her character for a near minute of combat time, which, as you know, is a long time in real life. I let her say how she wanted to attack, but I was telling her what she needed to do and where she needed to go. For a couple of turns, that's fine, but for over 7? The morale was in the pits, and I could feel it. I knew I screwed up somewhere, but I wasn't sure where yet. Fighter's player straight up had to walk out of the room for a little bit, and Ranger's player had to go comfort her. My girlfriend and Warlock's player tried to reassure me that it was just horrible luck, but I was certain I could have avoided this, and it really started getting to me. They rejoined, and I retconned that the charm would only last a minute, so adding the time outside and inside of combat that she was charmed, it would wear off next turn, but that makes the earlier call even dumber. I'm sorry, I'll move on. Fighter was glad to be able to play again, but was still too frustrated and exhausted to be able to roleplay the current situation, and just attacked the insane commander. Ranger finally came in for the rescue after being saved by his Drake, and the party was able to barely win the fight by the skin of their teeth. Now, naturally, Fighter had some choice words for me, and I let her say it. Only moments after combat was done did I realize how horribly wrong not letting that dispel magic go through made the game, so I felt like I deserved every bash. While she did like most of everything that happened before then, in her own words, not being able to control my character for most of the fight, and basically couldn't react to the death of her friend, that was awful, and I hope you never have to experience that. After taking everyone home, I was in tears. My girlfriend did everything to calm me down, but I was crying for a half an hour. I felt like I let them all down so hard. I'm just amazed that they're willing to stick with me after that mess. They agreed that we should have a casual hangout next time we meet, but they do still want to continue the story. They also recommended we probably just have a non-D&D related casual hangout once a month. When we start back up, that's going to be our plan. I may be a screw-up, but I sure do have some great players willing to help me back up. I know that they lurk in the sub, so if you guys read this, I promise to learn from that experience and give you a good time for your next game. TLDR, I, as the DM, made a poor call in a Dispel Magic, turning a simple charm effect into an absolute nightmare that almost led to a TPK. While this DM may have made a few mistakes in that session, at least they were able to own up to it, and admit that they might have made a few bad calls, which is more than I can say for a lot of the DMs I read about in these stories. Every DM is going to make a mistake every now and then, and being able to own up to it tells me that that group have a pretty decent one. Having a DM that thinks that they are perfect in every way and never make a mistake would be a huge red flag. And thankfully, it sounds like OP is still playing with the group to this day. Let's move on to the next story. I played as a cultist and lost a friend in real life. By Reddit user AccomplissedBug143. This is a long story, so I'll try my best to keep the setting to the essentials before getting to the story. The cast is as follows. Me, Lawful Evil, Female Drow Cleric. Friend, Chaotic Good, Male Dragonborn Multiclass. Friend number 2, Chaotic Neutral, Female Android Artificer. The DM was heavily into open world storytelling, where RP is the main focus, so a lot of flair and care was put into the NPCs. Due to the nature of our alignments being all over the place, he allowed actions to be done in private within reason. If a suspicious action was taken that would be noticeable by a party member, the DM would notify the respective players so they could choose to take action or not. He was fair and let us all know he wouldn't play favorites, and PvP wasn't off the table either. Now on to the story. We all meet up in the middle of the wasteland after my drow and the Dragonborn met up on a tavern, agreed to take on work and be teleported. The spell was botched, and we later encountered the android. For the sake of survival and unfamiliar surroundings, we all allied together and sought out refuge. Skip forward a few sessions, and we've learned to trust each other. Slowly but surely, I gather more and more members to my cult, until I have enough members to build a hierarchy. All this was done during my character's downtime, sacrificing rest for sermons to her followers and orders. During the day, I was still supportive of the party, often putting their needs before addressing the cult. And my party members had their own side stories too, and we'd often pull together to focus on the main goal and assist one another. Here is where the descent begins. I learned from our android that our Dragonborn is quite the womanizer, and rather unsuccessful at it, and has begun taking more of an interest in us, or rather, what we're doing. Later, the first signs of PvP take place when our Dragonborn punches the android, damage intended, for betraying one of the shady figures she cut a deal with, knowing he'd backstab them first. Our Dragonborn didn't care, and began to place his moralities on the party as a whole. With him being our frontline fighter, he could easily sweep either of us single-handedly, so we dare not challenge him physically. Later, he began taking an interest in my sermons, and the influx of people I brought in. I preached about Shar, domaining over loss and her sympathy. This was enough to get him off my back for a while, but he started tailing my followers, and that was a no-go. I had recruited a few women over the multiple sessions, some of them being experienced sex workers, so I set the stage. Using the lesser-known cult members, I staged rescue scenarios. The DM, of course, loving the chaotic energy of the campaign, allowed me to do so, putting my own cult members in false danger or in moments of weakness nearby our Dragonborn for them to be rescued and ultimately fall for him. I ensured these cult members would not die and healed any wounds sustained from the performance, while I built him a false harem. Those who participated in the harem were moved to the upper ranks of my cult and were subject to protection and gifts from the White Knight Dragonborn himself. So it was a win-win for them. Outside of the games, he was genuinely happier to be getting all the attention from female NPCs, which I kind of felt bad about, but ultimately encouraged him to keep a good thing going and try to treat them right. I continued to play the relationship from both angles, with the assistance of my DM. Productivity was at an all-time high, with our Dragonborn sex-driven to return and expand on his harem, while I was able to advance my cult. Our android really only cared about their building projects, which was fine. Everything was good, until it all fell apart. I was able to bring one of my followers to the point of faith that they began to gain the ability to cast magic. A civilian girl I had since the start made a breakthrough and was a shining symbol in my cult that they too could obtain power through faith. Unfortunately, due to the overexcitement through the cult, our Dragonborn heard word of my cult actually being successful and approached my drow directly with that same intimidating aura of physical altercation. I tried to reason with him in character, but his character was having none of it. He then went to my newly christened priestess and tried to enforce his ideals on her in front of me and the harem. He kept at his tailcoats during any form of downtime. I grew enraged, not sure if it was in character for me to do so, but I cast Hold Person on him, which was successful, and told him to stay away from her. It was at this moment he also noticed that the harem of women around him had quickly turned hostile, drawing weapons as well in defense of their priestess. And sadly, this broke him in character and out. Finding out almost all of the girls around him were a part of my plan and not a result of his own charisma killed his motivation to do anything. The session didn't last long after that, as his character grew untrusting and he ultimately stopped talking to me. We share a few Discord servers and stuff together, but any conversation we could have had for hours is now reduced to 2 or 3 replies at most. Sometimes I wonder if I took things too far. Update. Some people suggested that I try to reconnect and talk to him about what happened. I've messaged him on Discord, and we'll see what happens. I'll post the end result in the comments. Update number 2. I talked to him and dropped his side of the story in the comments. Not sure what else to say. I just have to say that the whole idea of OP building a cult disguised as a harem for the Dragonborn was a pretty neat plot idea. If I was the DM, I too would have been excited to implement something like that. For the Dragonborn to stop talking to OP over that is a bit much. At the end of the day, it is just a game, and it's just characters they are playing. It's understandable that the Dragonborn character might have been peeved, but if I was that player, I would have been like, holy shit, how did you pull that off? Though apparently, we get to hear the Dragonborn side of the story, which is rare in these stories. So without further ado, let's get right into it. I played a cultist, and here's my friend's side of the story. So first, a little more backstory since this is important. The friend in this story, playing the Dragonborn, introduced me to this group in order to play D&D. Apparently, he had been in sessions with them before, and had been kicked from the table for reasons he was unsure of. He thought this session would be a great way to introduce me to more friends, and spend more time connecting with specifically the other two, Android and DM, who were already pretty close-knit. During the session, he started to lose motivation to keep playing, simply because it seemed like me and the other player were getting more attention than him. He said it could be due to him being ultimately skeptical on what his character's end goal was, and trying to workshop ideas with the DM. He felt like more of a follower, since both my character and his were, in character, completely unaware of the environment. So we are largely reliant on the android to point us in the right direction, as a guide due to the area either being full of mostly sand or hostile camps. About a month or 2 into the session, he felt he made virtually no progress in the original quest he was assigned. He brought it up to the other player, out of character, who agreed to tone it back so we could do some more of my friend's quest. This was the time when the deal gone south resulted in the android backstabbing and killing the NPC. This caused a reaction in the other NPCs of the camp we were at, and thinking the android would lead us down another quest line to make up whatever he wanted to do. He decided to strike at him in character, due to one of his character traits, valuing loyalty, and essentially stating that his character was tired of being sidetracked in game. He then restated that we were hired for a specific mission. He said this was a brash way of saying he wanted to take the lead of the party, and he could have done better, but it wasn't in the moment decision. The quest I completely forgot about at this point since my character was focused on more cult-related business. Despite this attempt, nothing major came from it, and no real progress was made on the quest, aside from some traces of magic and hints of dragons being in the area. He said he practically gave up and started hitting on female NPCs, to which he was largely unsuccessful. So then he started getting more involved with our personal quest lines. He obviously didn't want to get involved with anything my character was putting out, because out of character, he knew about the brainwashing and creepy cult shit about shadows and blocking out the sun. And his character isn't overly technical either, but he decided that he'd try and squeeze his character in any way he can. He interacted with some of my cultists many times in private with the DM, and even put his hands on equipment he thought was magical in nature that belonged to the android, because his character had a natural affinity for magic. Around this tampering stage is when I received the word from some of my followers that my friend was questioning them. The android also informed my character of his tinkering, and informed my drow of his forthcoming attitude towards women lately. That's when the harem betrayal arc happened. The way he discovered about my freshly raised cleric is because, behind the scenes, he caught some gossip of disbelief from the ladies in the harem. He questioned them, which they denied, and then intimidated them. And with a roll, they spilled the information that I had been spending a lot of time with the cleric, and the cult seemed more active than normal. That's when he confronted me, and seeing a woman with the same deranged fanatical beliefs that my character embodied, he wanted to get her away from me and try to talk some sense into her. I stopped him with hold person, but the women turning on him was just the icing on the cake. In character, he was baffled, but out of character, he said, and I quote, "I thought I was doing something right when DM was paying attention to me. It wasn't important, but it felt like he was at least trying to keep me entertained. When you cast that spell, it felt like they took you from me, the DM and android. Like, why would I keep playing, just for you to be buddy-buddy with them? All I did was just hook them up with another friend, and they'd just kick me from the table again." That's kinda where the conversation on the game ended. We played some more personal catch-up with our lives. He said he's happy somewhat that I still talk to him, even if most of it is just small talk. It's late, and he's offline now. Honestly, I'm now left more confused than anything as I'm typing this. I've been thinking heavily on everything that went on. When I joined the party, I clicked with the DM and the other player instantly. Getting along was no issue. They were always kind to me, but I'm starting to wonder if they had something against my friend. I'd like to think that I'm a pretty smart guy, but I feel like I was blind to what I was doing. It was just roleplay. I was focused on the cult. Was this part of some plan? Why did the DM have this whole session in the first place? God, I'm an idiot. Well, there's a lot more to that story than I first thought. This all boils down to communication. If Dragonborn had said something about how he felt things were going, I feel a lot of this could have been avoided. Though, on the other hand, the way it's written, there is the possibility that the DM and android were using OP to try to get to Dragonborn in some way. Or, at least that's how OP feels. I would say to just have a talk with the whole group, and try to figure out what is going on. Because, honestly, I'm still confused. I guess I need more communication on this one too. Have you ever had a bad time in a game that was caused by a lack of communication? If so, what steps did you take to make them better? I'm sure plenty of people would love the advice. If you have a story that you would like to be shared in a video, be sure to post it in the comments, on the channel subreddit, or even just at me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you that watch and like my videos, and hope that I communicate that clearly. Until next time.